Has anyone ever been to a wedding where someone actually objected? And if so, how did that go? Went to a wedding where they skipped that part because the bride's adult daughter was planning to object. How was this known? Had she pre-announced her intention, or was she just that kind of person and people had accurately predicted it? She told somebody and they told the bride and groom. Huge thanks to that person. No one wants their wedding to remembered for the wrong reason. I feel like about half of weddings these days don't have that part, and not because of feared objections, just because it is outdated and weird. Premarital sex is a thing. Divorce is a thing. Divorce is a thing. Weddings cost like over $10. If you know reasons to stop a marriage outside of movies, you need to intervene at the engagement or earlier, not during the ceremony. That said, one of my wife's college roommates cancelled a wedding like a day or 2 days beforehand, right after graduating college, after being in a long-distance relationship with some guy for a year or so. Her family was quite well off, and she was dating a guy who lavished gifts and expensive dates on her whenever they were together. Said he ran his own company, just bought a them fancy house, etc. It turns out he was just super in debt, working a near minimum wage job and maxing out credit cards taken out fraudulently. He had a fake web page with other employees for his company that he set up for the sole purpose of keeping up the front. The house was only bought from grossly lying about income, pre-2007 housing crisis, on the mortgage application, and he was drowning in debt. The almost bride's father got bad vibes about the guy. A few things didn't add up, like he had this fancy house but couldn't afford any furniture, and he hired a pie who quickly uncovered the deception. And she didn't break up because he wasn't rich. She broke up because he spent tons of effort to lie about everything and was completely conning her and just trying to get her roped into joint ownership of his debt via marriage that he expected the family to pay off. Damn, if he just put that effort into working, he probably would have been successful. I know a few people like that. They work so fucking hard, constantly conning and hustling, and they'd probably make more money if they put all that energy into employment. My husband's first marriage. The brother of the bride stood up and said to my husband, "Say no, you can still be happy." They went through with the marriage, wound up divorcing with a messy breakup. Brother-in-law is still best friends with my husband. As far as he's concerned, he gained a brother and lost a sister, and is better off for it. And he never lets him forget the fact that he was right and he should have bailed. Edited for clarification. Oh damn, I assumed he was addressing the bride. That certainly puts a different spin on the story, lol. My auntie's fiancé was already married. Lady stood up waving marriage cert. So wedding didn't go ahead. The reception was on a longboat. So we still went to that. The fiancé went back to home country to sort it out and never came back. I think someone commented that's the original reason why they say that line, to make sure if they're legally allowed to marry. I worked a wedding where one of the moms objected, but I think the groom knew that the parent was going to say something, so they just responded with, "Oh, sit down, parent's name. We knew you didn't like this a year ago, and clearly we're not going to change our minds today." The wedding continued like nothing happened, but the mom was low-key shunned and people avoided her at the reception. Not a wedding, but at a funeral, someone objected to death. At my uncle's funeral, his ex-wife and a local church cult leader tried to raise him from the dead. We were all sitting there like normal people at a normal funeral, and she walks up to the casket and starts yelling, "James Lester, raise up." I didn't know she was there, or I would have prepared myself for shenanigans. Also, I didn't know my uncle's middle name was Lester, so please imagine the confusion. So she and the cult leader are literally yelling at my uncle's body. Not surprisingly, my uncle refused to resurrect himself. They were escorted out. I've actually never told this story because it makes my family look insane. I love the idea that he refused to resurrect. Like it was totally doable, he just chose not to. He was dead serious about dying. Nah, I'm good. Not surprisingly, my uncle refused to resurrect himself, probably pure spite. I can't imagine it was too amusing at the time, but that's a pretty funny story. He's definitely resting in peace, away from her yelling. This was in America, and the wedding was in a Buddhist temple. Parents of the groom stood up and objected because they didn't believe the bride was of the same class. They spoke in another language, so most of the English-speaking guests didn't know they were objecting. My husband was the best man, and those closest to the couple knew this might happen. The Buddhist priest said he would handle it if the parents tried anything. After the parents spoke for a while, the priest said to the groom, "You've heard what your parents had to say. What do you want to do?" The groom replied, "I want to marry my bride." So the priest asked the parents to leave. At this point, the rest of the guests are cluing in that this was not a nice part of the ceremony, and that the parents were actually objecting. So, as the parents walked out, some of the guests were berating them, saying things like, "You should be ashamed of yourself, and how could you do that?" And even though the groom was not happy with his parents, that was very hard for him to hear. That was 30 years ago. The couple is still married. They have 2 beautiful, successful children. After the groom's mom passed away, the groom's father came around and was involved in their lives until he died. Wow, that's fucked. I'm very impressed both that they are obviously happily married and that they decided to allow the father into their lives. If I had to guess, either one of 2 things happened. The mother was the one that was unhappy with it, and he just went with it because it's his wife, or B. Once his wife died, he realized, oh shit, my wife is gone, and now I don't have a kid. I hope they'll take me back. I miss them, and this isn't worth it. Yeah, both are very sad options, but I'm glad he got involved in the end. A woman in her 20s at the time objected to her mom marrying my uncle. So she started yelling, "Mom, don't marry him!" During the ceremony proceeded, and some family on the mom's side lead the daughter away to quit interrupting. I don't blame her. My uncle was a lying, lazy bastard. The marriage didn't last. I read the first bit as her mom marrying her uncle and was deeply concerned. I went to a wedding where the best man was replaced a week before because he banged the bride, but the wedding still went ahead just with a different best man. They are divorced now. This is only tangentially related, but I had a friend I knew for like 3 months who told me at the wedding I was the maid of honor. The wedding was starting, I was pushed to the front. I was chosen over her own sister. The whole wedding was that kind of chaos. It was the best wedding I've ever been to. I had to ask my original bridesmaids if they were okay with my older friends becoming my bridesmaids. They told me a day before the wedding they weren't coming. Why I wanted to change my bridesmaids. They both acted distant since a few months before the wedding, but a week before the wedding, I had my bachelorette, and the original bridesmaids didn't even want to stay for dinner because they had work the next day. My other friends, who usually never gossip about others, told me this was a bit unusual, and it was really the least they could do for me. My friend from years ago had to drive 3 hours home and get up at 6:00, and she was so happy to celebrate me and with me. I also organized and paid for my own bachelorette because I didn't want to feel like a burden for others. But how these so-called friends let me down during that stressful period is something I would never forget. So yes, sometimes there are emergency bridesmaids needed, and you were at the right place at the right time for her. I assume she was very grateful and relieved to have you there and be there for her. For multiple reasons too. My wife was promoted to bridesmaid at about 6:30 am on the day of a friend's wedding because her very pregnant Mo had a scare and ended up having to go to the hospital. It happens. My own brothers are evidence of this. Brother 1 was getting married. The night before, Brother 2 gets wasted and decides to drive. He gets pulled over and thrown in jail at like 4 am. Brother 1 won't bail him out because he needs the money for the honeymoon. He does manage to talk the cops into letting him get Brother 2's tux out of the impounded car, so another one of his friends can stand in his place for the wedding. Look, I don't need the moron. I don't even need the moron's car. I just need the tux out of the back so someone less moronic can be my best man tonight. Attended a wedding where the minister said something along the lines of, if anyone here objects to this marriage, you can keep your mouth shut. Today is not about you. I objected. I took giving my sister away literally. I wasn't the brightest 3-year-old. Oh, so wholesome. I love this. This is adorable. I went to a Catholic wedding where, when the priest asked this question, one of the groomsmen did a very loud, long throat clearing which got everyone laughing. Everyone except the bride's elderly Italian grandmother, who marched out of her seat and angrily hit the groomsman with her handbag and shouted at him, in Italian, "That just sounds like excellent entertainment." Oh my God, I'd fall out of my seat crying laugh when Nonna smacked him. That's pretty much exactly what happened. She just made everyone laugh even more. The priest was even having a good giggle. I was at one where the groom thanked the bride's ex for dying, as his loss was my gain. Didn't help the sons of his bride and ex were in attendance. Holy crap. Please tell me she divorced him. He's actually dead now, so perhaps it wasn't really his gain the way she seems to get rid of her husband. Well, that's either incredibly tragic or sort of suspicious. Or both at the same time. Groom, his loss, my gain. Bride, your gain. Next guy. Those last two guys were chumped. Black Widow sighted. I worked with a nurse who was called the Black Widow. This woman was sick. She was about early 60s, and apparently since her 20s had been targeting wealthy, dying men, and would seduce them and tell them she loved them and could take care of them. They of course all died in a year or two of marrying her, and she would give another. The last one she was with, she met at a cancer support group. She's loaded and retired, and was left a huge horse farm that she hangs out at now in her rich retirement. So many children of these men tried to warn their dads, and someone even filled with a license board, but she somehow always won against the families in court and would get everything and kept it. In my cousin's wedding, her friend said I object because she was not invited to the wedding. She was kicked out of the wedding. Why was she not invited if she was a friend of the bride? And why was she there anyways? I don't know the details, but my cousin and her friend were angry with each other, and so my cousin didn't invite her, and she came anyway to create a scene. Not quite the question as asked, but too funny to not share. Priest, any objections? Father of the bride lets out the hardest, loudest, most complex sounding sneeze I've ever heard in my life, completely with involuntarily saying a cool. Mother of the bride hammered on champagne. For fuck's sake, Jerry. It took a good 5 minutes for everyone to regain their composure. Nice, Jerry. I sneezed. Oh, I'm not allowed to sneeze. For fuck's sake, Jerry. For some reason, I heard this in an Irish accent, and it made it funnier. Gary on Derry Girls, maybe. I could see his wife saying, for fuck's sake, Gary, in an Irish accent. I had a friend who was a minister, and the subject came up if he asked the question during ceremonies he officiated. He laughed and said no way. He basically tells the couple not to include it because it only invites a moment of anxiety at best, misery at worst. His best story, and one of the reasons he stopped including the question, was a couple where the lead up to the wedding, the couple was obviously in love. The bride-to-be was very smiley and happy. Day of the wedding, she's stone-faced. He knows something is up because he's never seen her like this, and he asks if she is okay. I'm fine. Right before the service, he asks again. I'm fine. He gets to the question, does anyone object to this union? The bride reaches over, grabs the maid of honor, shoves her into the bride's spot and says, you're screwing him, you marry him, and then stormed out of the church. Slightly different circumstances, but I know a guy that was the videographer at a wedding where the groom was the one that objected to the wedding at that point. When the priest asked if anyone objected, the groom broke down crying and said that he couldn't go through with the wedding. Apparently, he had gotten a stripper pregnant and felt like he had to marry the stripper instead of the bride. He got pulled into a side room by the officiant, his father, and the father of the bride, while everyone else, including the bride, stood around awkwardly. A few minutes later, the father of the bride came out and told everyone that the ceremony was over and the wedding was off, but that everyone was welcome to go to the reception and enjoy the food. My friend didn't stick around for the reception, so I have no idea how it all turned out. But apparently the bride was understandably not taking it well. He got pulled into a side room by the officiant, his father, and the father of the bride. Was he ever seen again? Only parts of him. That's very unprofessional. He should have stayed and filmed the meal. This makes me so sad. On what's supposed to be the happiest day of your life, you lose your best friend, presumably, and partner at the same time. At least you didn't go quietly and rip the bandage nice and quick. I've seen people try and make it work anyway, so power to her. Fuck it. Everything is paid for and likely not getting any refunds, and the opportunity to share this in front of a large group of people they likely both know. To be fair, it sounds like the opportunity to object brought things out into the open that should have been all along. I was at a small ceremony, indoors, maybe 30 people tops listening. When the minister asked for any objections, a picture of the bride's dead grandmother that was hanging on the wall fell to the ground with a loud thump. We looked at each other, but the minister finished anyway. Divorced within a year. At his rehearsal dinner, a co-worker's mother toast included that his soon-to-be wife was a damn dirty whore who wasn't good enough for her son. Folks not happy. Video ended, so didn't see the whole thing. At wedding which I attended, his mom started to say something of the speak now. Partner was silenced by her daughter. Mom left and didn't see the rest of the ceremony. Everything about that poor guy was drama. My friend's Mill made a speech at the wedding which included, "Now I can go have sex all night. You ain't gotta wait no more. You ain't got a sweet talker no more, baby boy. You can just take her up whenever you like." In almost the most jealous tone I have ever heard. It was unsettlingly bizarre. She didn't object to the marriage, but we all objected to her. Also, before anyone assumed she was drunk, it was a dry wedding. Edit. I'm aware that dry weddings and drinking aren't mutually exclusive. The woman was not drunk. She's just a gross person. You wouldn't believe the grimace on my face as I read that. I feel like a common theme here is, it's always the mother of the groom. I don't know if it's a UK thing or even just a one specific church thing, but I was told by the priest in a rehearsal that if someone objects, even as a joke, the priest is required to pause the ceremony and talk to the objector alone to discuss their concerns and decide if they have a valid objection. Like it's not a fun, jokey moment. It's a real legal part of the ceremony. He also said it used to be custom that if you raised an invalid objection, you then had to pay for the wedding. So hypothetically, someone could have objected at a royal wedding via loudspeaker or even being at the church, and they would have had to follow protocol while on air and pay for the wedding as well. This is bankruptcy material. I have friends who objected during our rehearsal as a joke. The minister told them that any objection on the actual day had to be investigated and proven to be either true or false, and that the ceremony would be paused until that investigation was complete. So, not a thing to go joking around about. Objector. I object. The groom is a dumbass. Minister, all right, shut it down. We're going to have to open an investigation into whether the groom is in fact a dumbass. I used to make wedding videos. Did one at an outdoor wedding spot high on one side of a valley. It had rained earlier in the day, but the storms had cleared and the wedding could continue. During the vows, I don't touch the camera, just step back and let it run. So I'm spaced out waiting for the vows to finish and notice a radio tower far across the valley. Suddenly, lightning hits the radio tower. I had enough time to think, boy, when the thunder gets here, it'll probably loud. I also had enough time to clue in that the minister was saying, if anyone objects to this union, let him speak now or forever. Kablamen. Total silence in the venue. Preacher takes a second to look around and make sure everybody is all right and one has been smoked. Well, that's never happened before. Afik, they're still married. That was 10 years or more ago. A relative visited one ceremony where it was asked if anyone objects, and the groom decided it's a good time for a joke and said, I do. The lady who was going to marry the couple just turned and left. They had to go through all the paperwork again and change the date. Got married, divorced in like 3 years, if I remember correctly. There's a video going around where the wife objected as a joke and shit got real serious, real fast. Shout out to the link if anybody has it. Is this the one? Apps. UW Dalisaba, Kentucky, 20,151,106 marriage officer. Leaves wedding ceremony. After groom jokingly says, no in Turkey or this one. Hots. Reddit watch people the incitements and 112 yuking incitements 170 waldi chukinglin brided chukingly saying. The second one is the video that I was referring to, but that first video is fire. Thanks Wallscrew. Yep, wedding officiants don't fuck around. If you listen closely, the wording, at least here in the UK, is, if any of you know any reason in law. It's not a place for someone to air their grievances. It's a check to make sure there's no legal reason why the couple can't marry. For example, if one of them is already married to someone else, or if they're related. If someone brings an objection, the wedding is halted right there until the claim is fully investigated. Oldie but a goodie. This happened back in the 70s. This was shared to lay by the guy who married my parents. It went something like this. Does anyone object to this union? I do. That's my husband, so they paused the wedding. The bride, groom, and the woman objecting went into a small room. The woman who objected provided documentation showing the groom was still legally her husband. Apparently, the couple had started divorce proceedings sometime earlier, but never finished. The wedding was cancelled and everyone sent home. Finally, someone used the moment to object in a correct way. A friend of mine has a band that plays lots of weddings and other parties. They were hired for a birthday party that turned out to be a surprise wedding. The guy surprised his Jeff with a proposal and wanted to have a wedding ceremony then and there. She said no and left. Was the guy's name Gaston? A bit manipulative on his part, as are most public proposals. That alone deserves a no. Kind of. My uncle was getting married. Small, just a handful of family and a minister. I was videotaping. My grandmother was not into it at all. With each line spoken by the minister, she had a cutting, sarcastic response. I could not believe it. It was so unlike her. When that part came up, she said, "I object. But does it really matter? They are going to do it anyway." The minister just ignored her and proceeded, business as usual. They were divorced within a year. Wish I had a copy. Grandma called it, I guess, or caused it. What's really going to bake your noodle later is, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything? The vicar who married us said to everyone at the beginning, as part of the introduction, not to say anything as a joke, unless they actually had a reason, as legally she would have to stop the ceremony and investigate the claim. I worried that would tempt some joker even more, but we got through the silence with only a couple of muffled giggles. Not a wedding I attended, but my best friend went to her aunt's wedding. Aunt's future, toxic. Meal whips out proof from Ancestry that they are actually first cousins. Wedding was cancelled, and the bridegroom haven't spoken since. They're actually first cousins, the bridegroom haven't spoken since. So sad when families drift apart. Curious why the mill waited till then to say something. Min-maxing toxicity. Yes. At my cousin's, the bride's ex showed up, and when he stood up to object, my uncles grabbed him and rushed him out of the church and gave him a tune-up in the parking lot. Catholic wedding, of course. Edit. Holy shit, Christian rituals around the world are different than the ones I've seen. Oh. Tune up in the parking lot. I wasn't expecting to laugh out loud this early in the day. Thanks, Pally. Groom found out that bride was cheating 2 days before the wedding day. He spilled the beans while exchanging the vows. Damn them. That's some TV show level shit. Dude paid most of it, and it was too late for a refund. I'm out this money. Might as well go out in style. Honestly, takes guts to do, but damned if I don't appreciate the follow-through. I hope he still had the reception too. Divorce party. There was a Redditor who was the bride in her wedding, and she discovered that her groom was cheating on her. She took Reddit's suggestion that she slide in a photograph of them together into the rotating montages at the pre-ceremony. She did that and bailed on the rest of the wedding ceremony. What a shame the poor groom's bride is AI. Who, or Frank Reynolds, was more to Beth. One of the groomsmen thought it would be funny to raise an objection. He did not understand that by law, all proceedings had to be stopped and investigated, meaning the officiant had to take him aside to question him. He had the audacity to keep the joke going until the officiant said that he would not continue and the wedding would be called off. Both sets of parents and multiple guests also had to be questioned to confirm the objection was uncalled for. It took over an hour. The wedding scheduled after was set back 30 minutes. Their guests started arriving while all this was going on. It was a huge mess. Dude thought it was hilarious. I clocked him with my fancy, dyed special for the day shoe the minute thy shortened photoshoot was over. He was asked to not attend the reception. Bridegroom feared for his safety after I whacked him. They dropped him as a friend immediately. They will celebrate their 30th anniversary this June. Also note, this situation began the new tradition in my family of using Quaker self-uniting, available in Pennsylvania, marriage licenses and having a loved one officiate at the ceremony. It basically means that the couple is married the moment they and their witnesses sign and mail their license to the municipality. They are already married when the ceremony takes place. The question of an objection is not a part of the ceremony. Edit. Changed a word for clarity. This will sound absolutely stupid, but when I was a kid, my deeply religious aunt had her wedding at a local church. During the objecting part, lightning struck very near the church. I remember to this day how the following thunder was so loud that the fancy windows of the church started rattling. Well, the timing of the strike was very unfortunate for my uncle, because my aunt took this as a sign of a god objecting to her marriage and called the wedding off on the spot. Needless to say, they married on the same day, year later, and this time, without objection from a god. They are still married to this day. I have a new answer to what would you do if you were God for a day. Needless to say, they married on the same day, year later. I can assure you, this was not needless to say. My mum told me she was going to pay an old boyfriend to stand up and object at my wedding. She didn't in the end, but I did cast a quick look around in the church before walking down the aisle. My mother-in-law actually brought my wife's ex to our wedding in hopes that my wife would see him and leave me. She didn't really care, other than being mad at her mum. I talked to the guy after the wedding and thanked him for coming, just to be polite. He told me that I wasn't good enough. This was a message my mail had sent a number of times, so it didn't really catch me off guard. I grabbed and shook his hand, smiled, and I told him he was a fucking creep for coming uninvited to a wedding of his ex from 10 years ago. Then I invited him to enjoy some refreshments during the cocktail hour and walked away. My wife gets mad about the not good enough comment and has him and her mother removed from the reception. He and my mother removed from the reception. He and my mill are still close, and she still invites him over on major holiday. I'm younger than my wife by 3.5 years, and my first impression of the guy was hearing him ask my file how he felt about his daughter marrying a child, so I pretty much wrote him off as an asshole from day one. My mile permanently hurt her relationship with her daughter that day, and we didn't see her for close to a year after the wedding. You see her now. She has no remorse and continues a strong relationship with a man who seems too consumed by a decade-past relationship with your wife. This isn't bitterness I'm describing, it's danger. That is an unsafe environment for you two. These people are unstable. Imagine if she had gotten every boy you ever had a relationship with serious casual to stand up and object, then proceed to confess their undying love for you. What type of Spartacus shit? The mum of one of the bridesmaids got up and yelled, I object. You fucking stole him from her, while pointing at the bride. I've known the groom for a long time, and by proxy the bride. I am still very good friends with them. I have never seen her more infuriated than at that moment. The bridesmaid got up from her chair and was like, I'm so sorry. Let me get her out of here. The bridesmaid and the bride's stepfather escorted the woman out of the wedding, and it continued. Oh yeah, I guess you're right, ex-girlfriend's mother. I'll marry your daughter now if you like. Not exactly an objection, but the wedding was on a boat. No one could leave, and the groom was Jewish and marrying a Mexican Catholic woman. The groom neglected to tell his family it was a full Catholic wedding, and the groom's family stood up and pitched a fit when they realized the groom was going to take communion. The uncle who sponsored his bar mitzvah stood up and announced that the groom was a disgrace to the family and walked downstairs. The reception was a shit show. Oh, you don't get to leave without stories from that reception. Oh, it was such a train wreck. So the boat was a 3-story day cruiser with the wedding on the top floor and the reception on the big middle deck. Once the groom's family realized what was happening, many of the Jewish relatives simply got up and went downstairs during the ceremony in protest, following the uncle. During the reception, family members were trying to bribe the captain to return to shore. Others were trying to charter a boat to pick them up, and a few of the cousins threatened to jump overboard and just swim to shore. I was a friend of the groom, but not Jewish. At one point he came over to me frustrated with his family and tried to vent to me that this was his wedding and his choice, but I was having none of it. I reminded him he didn't tell anyone ahead of time and then trapped them on a fucking boat. Also, this wasn't really his decision, but his wife's, and he was just going along with it. The only people dancing was the bride's family. The mother of the groom begged off that her ankles hurt and only danced with her son for a couple minutes. When the JJ played Havanagila, the uncle got up and ordered the DJ to stop. The silence was palpable. Apparently many of the wedding gifts were taken off the table and returned. 6 years later, the marriage was dissolved and he formally apologized to his family. He reaffirmed his faith and restored his position in the family. I was at one. Didn't know what happened as I was in the back. The bride runs out to the limo, her family after her. I said to the person next to me, cold feet. She's like, oh no, I thought this might happen. Her ex is here. We went outside. He'd apparently come into a lot of money. He came to the side door front of the church, said he objected because he's rich and wants her back. She paused too long for the groom's liking. He said, fuck you both. She ran. Last I saw, they were at the limo with her. She was crying. Have no idea how it ended, but there was no wedding. We went to the reception, no bridal party. We ate, drank, danced, and left. What the fuck, lol, I need more info. I went as a group with a work friend who was a relative of the groom. This was early 90s. I know wedding etiquette is different. We really just all got dressed up and went with her. We were late, so just took seats as we found them. At the reception, we just arrived. It was still on. The food came out, the bar was open. We just went with it. The groom's family was there. No one seemed upset. I don't think they liked the bride to begin with. That's all I knew. I used to work at a fancy stately home as a waitress. Most of my shifts were weddings. This guy's objection was a bit untimely, but what happened after was even better, so the actual wedding happened at a church nearby, and they had the reception with them. This guy rocks up after the actual ceremony to declare his undying love for the bride and told the groom and entire wedding party that he'd been sleeping with the bride. Cue tears and drama, blah blah blah, blah blah. He's obviously chucked out of the wedding. Turns out he'd gotten an invite for the evening only and thought he was coming to object at the actual ceremony. The groom forgave the bride. He was a total wet letters, and they are both crying and hugging outside. The party carried on and all was great, until someone overheard the chief bridesmaid talking to her friend about the fact she had also been sleeping with the bride. This prompted grandmother of the groom, about 75 years old, to punch the bride in the face. Groom apparently forgave the bride again as they went home together. I'm guessing he knew she was a hoe bag, so wasn't really that surprised as I'm here. I'll give you another one. Same place, literally weeks after the first wedding, we have a wedding where the groom's family are clearly loaded and full of their own self. Important. Especially the groom's mother, who gave us hell in the preparations. Nothing was good enough, kept changing how she wanted things, talking to us like scum, and making it very clear her family are a better class of people than the bride's family, who are pretty nice and down to earth. Anyway, halfway through the evening do, someone's handbag goes missing. The groom's mother stormed into the kitchen, demanding that the manager search all our bags and saying she was calling the police on us, thieving scumbags. Manager tells her, more politely than I would have, to calm down and not make assumptions. He has the security search the place. They go into the men's toilets and can see a guy stood in the stall with his back against the door. I guess they could see his feet. He refuses to come out initially, but eventually he does. He had 2 women's handbags in there that he'd been wonking into. He was also off his head on coke. The guy was the groom's brother, son of bitch lady who accused us all of stealing. Her face when she found out was amazing, and she picked up her stuff and left straight away. Police came and the guy was arrested. One of my cousins is married to literally one of the kindest and coolest dudes I have ever met. Before the wedding, her little sister was saying how she's marrying my best friend. At the wedding, when the priest dude asks if anyone objects, the room is dead quiet and all you hear is a little girlish whisper, I do. It was honestly really adorable, and we all laughed, and my cousin's husband and her little sister are still best friends. I apologize for any misunderstandings with my post. I thought it would have been obvious, but I guess it wasn't my bad. Anyway, the event was a few years ago, and the little sister was about 9 or 10 at the time. Sorry for any confusion or concern. Lol, that definitely makes a huge difference. Goes from jealous friend who was having a guy on the back, burner to sweet sister who really liked her new bill and maybe had a little crush. One is a dick move, one is a total compliment that she's unfortunately likely be embarrassed by when she's an adult. But that's really adorable.